She couldn't even finish basic, my cousin told the ranger. Then he went pale and stopped laughing. I left the house at 4 a.m. so I would have the whole drive to make myself smaller. That is a strange thing to admit, that a grown woman would spend 300 miles of interstate practicing how to shrink, but that is exactly what I did. And I had done it enough times that I could do it in the dark, at 70 miles an hour, without ever taking my eyes off the road. I had a travel cup of gas station coffee in the holder and a photograph clipped to the visor, and I drove south into a sky that had not decided yet whether it was going to be morning, and I rehearsed my answers the way some people rehearse a speech. Still in the army, yeah. Nothing exciting. A little of this and that. You know how it is. No big deal. Somebody has to push the paper. I had 100 of them, those small answers, and every one of them was a lie by omission. And I had gotten so good at them over the years that they came out sounding true. They came out sounding like the kind of thing a person says when there really is nothing more to say. That was the craft of it. You did not deny anything. You did not claim anything. You just handed the room the version of yourself it had already decided to believe. And you let it be relieved, and you changed the subject to somebody else's children. The uniform was in the trunk. I had almost not brought it, and then I had brought it anyway. The way you bring an umbrella you have no intention of opening, and I had zipped it into its bag and laid it flat under the spare and told myself I would not think about it again. There was no reason to think about it. Nobody in the house I was driving toward had seen me in it. Nobody in that house, if I am being honest, was entirely sure I owned one. The photograph on the visor was of my father. He was standing in the side yard of the house I grew up in a work shirt with the sleeves rolled, squinting at whoever was holding the camera, and he had a wrench in one hand and a look on his face like he had just been interrupted in the middle of fixing something and did not mind as much as he was pretending to. That was the whole of him, in one square of paper. A man who was always fixing something, who did not mind being interrupted, who pretended he did. He had been a lineman for the county for 31 years, up the poles in the ice storms, out at 2 a.m. when a transformer blew, and he had taught me that you finish the job. You do not come down off the pole because it is cold. You finish, and then you come down. I was 18 years old when he died, and I did not get to finish saying goodbye, and the not finishing of that one thing had shaped the next 26 years of my life in ways I am only now learning to say out loud. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me slow down. That morning, all I was doing was driving and shrinking and holding a job of work in my chest that I was not going to mention, and watching the mile markers count down toward a dinner I did not want to go to, for a cousin I barely knew, at the house of a woman who had spent 2 decades telling everyone I was a quitter. I pulled off once at a rest stop just past the state line, and I sat in the car with the engine off and the windows going gray, and I took off my watch. It was not a fancy watch. It was a field watch, black, scuffed, the kind of thing that costs about what a decent dinner costs. But it had been on my wrist through 3 deployments and a great deal of my life, and if you knew watches, and some people do, it said a certain thing about the person wearing it. It said this is somebody who is issued to places. So I took it off and I put it in the glove box and I put on a thin gold thing I keep for exactly this. A going home watch. A watch that says nothing at all, and I looked at my own wrist for a second, like it belonged to a stranger. My phone buzzed on the seat. It was my brother Glenn. "Just come," the message said. "Don't make it a thing." I looked at that for a while. Don't make it a thing. As if I were the one who made things. As if, in the entire history of our family, I had ever once been the person who stood up at a table and made a thing of anything. I typed back on my way and I put the phone face down and I sat there another minute in the going gray light, and then I started the car and pulled back out onto the road and I did the last hour with the radio off. I want you to understand who I actually was that morning, so that the rest of it will land the way it landed on that table. 3 weeks before that drive, I had stood in front of a formation of 92 people at a place called the Drill Sergeant Academy, and I had told them that most of them were going to fail. Not fail out. I do not fail people out for sport. I told them that most of them, at some point in the coming weeks, were going to reach a moment where they discovered they were not yet the thing they had assumed they already were, and that the whole point of the academy was to get them to that moment early, in front of me, instead of late, in front of 180 terrified recruits who were depending on them to be steady. I told them that the campaign hat they wanted so badly, the brown round, the one every soldier in the army recognizes on sight, was not a hat. It was a promise. It was a promise that the person wearing it could be trusted with the rawest, most frightened, most breakable version of an American 18-year-old, and could take that kid and, in 10 weeks, hand back a soldier. I told them I had worn that hat for a long time, and I told them I still did the road marches with them at 44 years old, in the front, setting the pace, and that I did that for one reason: I do not certify anyone to do a thing I am not willing to do beside them. There was a candidate in that class, a young sergeant named Ruiz, who put his hand up when I said that and asked me, respectfully, why? Why still do the road marches? He had the good sense to sound like he genuinely wanted to know and not like he was testing me, which is a distinction I have learned to hear in about a syllable and a half. And I told him the truth, which is that the day I stop being willing to carry the ruck is the day I lose the right to tell anyone else to pick theirs up. And that authority is not a thing you are issued once and keep in a drawer. It is a thing you re-earn every single morning in front of the people you are asking to bleed, or you do not really have it at all. You just have a rank, and a rank is not the same thing as authority. A rank is what the army gives you. Authority is what the soldiers give you, and they only give it to people who show up. I had spent 26 years showing up. That was the whole secret. There was no other secret. I watched Ruiz write that down, and I thought, as I sometimes do, about how strange it was that I could stand in front of 100 people who would run through a wall on my word, and then drive home twice a year to a house where I was not trusted to be told the truth about the pot roast. I am a sergeant major. I have been in the army for 26 years. I came in at 18, and I never left. And along the way, I did 2 tours as a drill sergeant on the trail at basic combat training, which is the hardest and the best job I have ever had. And then I did the jobs that come after that, and about 4 years ago, the Army made me the senior enlisted leader, the commandant, of the schoolhouse where drill sergeants are made. Which is to say, at this point in my life, I do not train recruits. I train the people who train the recruits. I am, in a manner of speaking, the standard. When there is an argument about what right looks like, at a certain level, it is my job to be the answer. I have a wall of coins in my office. I have letters from soldiers I put through the worst summer of their lives, thanking me for it, some of them 20 years later. I have a reputation, in the small world where I live, that walks into rooms before I do. None of that is on the mantle at my aunt's house. None of it has ever been in that house at all. In that house, I am the girl who ran off to the army and could not hack it, and came slinking back and has been drifting ever since. Some kind of clerk somewhere, never married, never settled, a little bit of a disappointment and a little bit of a cautionary tale, the person the other cousins get compared to when they are doing well. Do not end up like Maggie, poor Maggie, still in the service, if you can believe it, doing whatever it is she does. I had let that stand for 26 years. I need to tell you why, because if you do not understand the why, then you will think I was a coward, and I have made my peace with a lot of things, but I will not let you think that one. The year I turned 18, I raised my right hand, and I swore an oath, and I got on a bus, and I went to basic combat training, and 3 weeks into it, in the very first days when they still had us in the reception battalion getting our shots and our haircuts and our fear, a message came for me through the Red Cross. My father was sick. Not sick the way people are sick and then get better. Sick the way the doctor lowers his voice. It had come up fast, the way the bad ones sometimes do, and by the time anyone understood how fast, I was already 3 states away with a shaved head and glasses that did not fit, and a rifle I did not yet know how to clean. And I was learning that week exactly how little an 18-year-old private controls about her own life. I want to be very precise about this, because the family never was. The Army did not refuse to let me go. That is not what happened, and I have spent a lot of years correcting that version quietly, in my own head, in the middle of the night. What happened is that the machinery of emergency leave for a soldier in the first weeks of training is slow and careful, and it moved at the speed it moves at, which is not the speed of a man dying. There were forms, there was verification, there was a chaplain, a kind one, who sat with me on a metal chair and made phone calls and did everything he could and told me the truth, which was that it was going to take a few days. It took a few days. I remember the phone bank in the reception battalion, a row of payphones bolted to a cinder block wall and the cord that was too short, so you had to stand hunched against the wall to use it. And the line of other recruits behind you pretending not to listen while you got the one call a day they let you make. I stood at that wall every evening for 4 days with a fistful of quarters and my heart in my throat, and I called the hospital, and I got my mother, or I got a nurse, and the news each day was a little worse than the day before. The chaplain was a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a soft voice, and he pulled me out of formation twice and sat with me on a metal folding chair in a little office and made calls on my behalf. Real calls to real people. And he did not lie to me. That is the thing I remember most about him. He did not tell me it would be all right. He told me the leave was moving and that it was moving as fast as the system moved, and that the system did not move as fast as I needed it to, and that he was sorry and that he would sit with me as long as I wanted to sit. I have tried to be that kind of honest with frightened soldiers ever since. It is the only gift he had to give me, and it turned out to be an enormous one. My father died on the 4th day in a hospital bed, with my mother holding one hand and my brother holding the other, and my chair, the 3rd chair, empty. And I was not there. I was in a barracks in the middle of the country, folding a shirt into a perfect square because a man in a brown round had told me to, and I did not know yet that he was already gone. I made it home for the funeral. Barely. I got there after the first hymn, in a borrowed black dress that did not fit any better than the glasses had. And I walked into the back of that church, and everyone turned around, and the person whose face I remember is my Aunt Lorraine. Lorraine is my father's younger sister. She loved him. I want to say that plainly because everything that came after came out of love, turned sideways by grief. She loved her brother, and her brother was dead, and she needed the world to make a kind of sense that it was refusing to make, and standing in the back of that church in a dress that did not fit was a girl who had not been there. "You couldn't even finish," she said to me. Not loudly, she did not have to say it loudly. "You couldn't even finish, and you couldn't even be here." I did not defend myself. I was 18. My father was in a box at the front of the room. I did not have it in me to explain the Red Cross message process to a grieving woman, and even if I had, it would have sounded like an excuse, and there is no version of "I tried" that helps anybody in the back of a church, so I let her have it. I let her have the version where I was a girl who quit things and let people down, because that version let her stand up straight and get through the day, and I decided, without deciding, that I could carry it. I did not understand, at 18, that a thing you pick up to carry for one bad afternoon can become a thing you carry for the rest of your life. By the time I finished basic, and I did finish basic at the top third of my company, the story was already set back home like concrete. Maggie couldn't hack it. Maggie ran off and left her daddy. And every year I did not come home and fight it, the concrete got a little harder, until fighting it would have meant taking a jackhammer to my own family's understanding of the worst year of their lives and reopening my father's death and standing in the rubble, insisting on my own dignity over his grave. I never had the stomach for it. It was easier, and I told myself it was kinder, to simply become excellent somewhere else, where nobody knew the story, and to come home twice a year and be small. So I finished everything. That became the shape of my whole life. I finished basic, and I finished airborne, and I finished the drill sergeant course, and I finished a bachelor's degree at night, and I finished 26 years, and every single thing I finished was, in some buried way, an argument I was having with a woman in the back of a church who could not hear me. I just never once let myself grieve him out loud. Because grieving him out loud meant admitting how much it had cost me not to be there. And admitting that meant feeling it. And I had built a very tall, very disciplined tower, specifically so that I would never have to feel it. That was the woman driving south that morning. Not a clerk, not a quitter, the Army's senior drill sergeant with a wall of coins and a tower she had spent 26 years building, driving to a dinner to be called a charity case one more time, with her father clipped to the visor. I got to Lorraine's house a little before 5 in the evening. It is a low brick ranch house on a street of low brick ranch houses, with a carport instead of a garage and a flag on a pole in the yard. And there were already 6 cars in the driveway and along the curb when I pulled up, and I could see through the front window that the living room was full. I parked across the street, which is a thing I do, park where I can see the exits, and I sat for a minute with the engine ticking and watched the house. I want to be honest about that minute. Part of me wanted to put the car in drive and go home. I am 44 years old, and I have walked into rooms that were actively trying to kill me with a steadier pulse than I had sitting across the street from my aunt's living room. There is no fear like the fear of the people who knew you before you became who you are. They have a version of you filed away, and they will hand it back to you the second you walk in, and no metal on earth can stop them. I reached back and I touched the trunk latch through the seat, the way you touch a thing to remind yourself it is there. And I thought about the uniform folded under the spare tire. Not tonight, I told myself. Not tonight, and not ever, if I can help it. Then I got out of the car and I went and knocked on my aunt's door in my thin gold watch and my nothing clothes, and I put on my small smile, and I got ready to be the story they told about me. Glenn opened the door. My brother's 4 years younger than me and looks 10 years older than that, in the way of men who have worked outdoors and worried indoors, and he hugged me on the porch, a beat too long, which is Glenn's whole vocabulary of apology. He is not a bad man. He is a tired one, and he has spent his life keeping the peace in a family that mistakes peace for the absence of conflict, and a long time ago he made a quiet arrangement with himself to never be the one who started anything. I love him. I have also spent 20 years watching him not defend me, and I have made my peace with that too, or I thought I had. You made it, he said. Thanks for coming. It means a lot to Dylan. Sure, I said. Happy to help. Where do you want me? He blinked, because it was a strange thing to say, and I watched him decide it was nothing, and file it, and move on. That is the tell of a house that has stopped listening to you. You can say a soldier's whole life in 4 words on the porch, and they will hear only the politeness and let the rest go by. That is a soldier's question, and Glenn did not hear it as anything but polite. But I heard myself say it. Where do you want me? And I thought, there it is, the shrinking, right on schedule. The house smelled like a pot roast and a candle fighting each other, and it was loud with the specific loudness of a family that only assembles for occasions. And I made my way through it the way I make my way through any crowd, reading it, clocking it, taking the temperature. My mother was in the good chair by the window, and she lifted a hand to me, and I went and kissed the top of her head. She is 70 now, and smaller every year, and she held my hand for a second longer than the greeting required. And there was something in her face I did not have time to read before somebody called out that the food was almost ready. And then Dylan came around the corner with a young man beside him, and the whole evening changed direction, though nobody in that room felt it move but me. Dylan is Lorraine's son, my first cousin, and he was 23 years old that night, and he was wearing his uniform to dinner. I want to be gentle about the uniform to dinner, because I did it too at his age. That need to be seen as the thing you have just barely become. And there is something almost tender in it if you catch it in the right light. He had graduated his training not long before, and he had orders to deploy, and this whole dinner was his send-off, and he wanted his family to see him as a soldier, and not as the boy who used to knock over the Christmas tree. So he had put on his combat uniform, his OCPs, pressed and fresh, the rank of a specialist on his chest, and he was walking around his mother's living room in it, like a man who had discovered the exact center of the earth. The young man beside him was a different thing entirely, and I saw it before Dylan said a word. He was about 30, and he was in civilian clothes, a plain shirt and jeans, and he carried himself the way a certain kind of soldier carries himself, which is to say, he took up no more space than he needed, and he had already found the exits without appearing to look for them. His hair was high and tight, but growing out at the edges the way it does when a man has been somewhere he could not get a haircut. He had a stillness to him. And when Dylan pulled him forward to make the introduction, I saw, on the young man's forearm below his rolled sleeve, the edge of a scroll tattoo, and I did not need to read it to know what regiment it named. "This is my boy, Sergeant Bell," Dylan announced to the room, with his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Actual ranger, regiment, and everything. Flew in for me. We came up through the same battalion." That was not quite true, the same battalion part, and I could tell it was not quite true by the way the young man let it pass without correcting it, which is its own kind of courtesy. He put out his hand to the room in general and said hello to the people who said hello to him, and he was polite and easy and warm, and then Dylan brought him around the circle, and he got to me. "And this is my cousin Maggie," Dylan said, in a voice that had already, in 4 words, told the young man exactly how to file me. She's in the army too. Kind of, I agreed, and I put out my hand. The young man took it and shook it, and I felt the room tilt. I have shaken 40,000 hands in my life. I have shaken the hands of soldiers on the worst days of their lives and the best ones, in receiving lines in hospital rooms and on graduation fields with a brown round on my head and 180 new soldiers behind me. And I know a soldier's hand, and I know a thing that is harder to describe, which is that I know when a soldier knows me. There is a specific hesitation, a half beat where the grip holds a fraction too long and the eyes do a small, involuntary thing. His grip held a fraction too long. His eyes did the small, involuntary thing. And then Dylan pulled him away toward the kitchen to show him something, and the moment broke before it could finish, and I stood there in my aunt's living room with my nothing watch on my wrist and my heart going a little faster than I wanted it to. "You look after him out there," I said to the young man's back, which is a thing you say, but I meant it as more than a thing you say. And he half turned and answered me over his shoulder. "Ma'am, I try," he said. "He doesn't always let me." He almost had it, right there. I could see it working behind his eyes, the way you can watch a lock turn over. Out of uniform, out of context, 12 years older than the last time he had seen my face, he was one clean second of quiet away from placing me. If dinner had been calm, if the room had let him think, he would have had it in a minute. But dinner was not calm, and the room did not let him think. And before he could turn that last tumbler, my cousin Dylan opened his mouth at the table, and everything I had folded away for 26 years walked out into the middle of the pot roast and stood there for everyone to see. We sat down to eat around 6. It was a big table, one of those extendable ones with a leaf put in, and a card table added on the end for the overflow. And there were 14 or 15 of us, packed in around it, elbow to elbow, passing bowls. Lorraine sat at the head, in her element, because feeding people is how my aunt says the things she cannot otherwise say. Dylan sat halfway down with Sergeant Bell beside him in the place of honor, the guest, the ranger. My mother was across from me. Glenn was down the end wrangling his kids. I was where I always am at that table, off to the side near the wall, in the seat you give the person you do not have to keep entertained. For the first while it was fine. It was better than fine. Dylan was flying, telling his training stories, and the young ranger beside him was gracious about it, laughing in the right places, and I watched Sergeant Bell watch Dylan, and I saw a good soldier being kind to a young one, letting the kid have his moment, and I thought, that is a well-raised man, wherever he was raised, and some part of me wondered again where I had seen his face. I kept coming back to it, the way you keep pressing a tongue against a sore tooth. There was something in the way he ate, even, that snagged at me. Some economy of motion, elbows in, no wasted movement. The table manners of a man who had once had a very short time to eat a very bad meal and had never lost the habit of speed. I had seen 10,000 young men eat exactly like that, in a chow hall, under a clock, with a drill sergeant walking the aisle. I had been the drill sergeant walking the aisle. And every time I got close to the memory, somebody passed a bowl, or Dylan launched into another story, and it slid away from me again, and I told myself I was imagining it, that all young soldiers carry a little of the same weather, and I went back to being small and passing the potatoes. Once, when the talk got loud, Sergeant Bell caught my eye across the table on purpose, and he gave me a small nod. Soldier to soldier, the kind you give across a room when you have both noticed the same thing and neither of you is going to say it. I did not know yet what he thought we had both noticed. I thought he was just being kind to the odd relative in the corner. I nodded back. I have thought since that he was already most of the way to knowing and was giving me a chance to be ready, and I was too busy hiding to take it. Then the conversation, the way it does, came around to me. It was my mother's fault, in the innocent way that these things are always somebody's innocent fault. She said, to the table, that it was nice to have me home, that I did not get down as often as she would like, that the army kept me busy. And a woman down the table, a cousin's wife, asked me the question people always ask, which was, so what is it exactly that you do in the army? And I gave the small answer, of course I did. I had been giving it in my head since 4 that morning. A little of everything, I said. Training side, mostly. Nothing too exciting. And I would have gotten away with it, the way I always got away with it, except that Dylan, who was 3 beers into his own send-off and hungry to be the soldier in the room, decided that my small answer was an opening. Don't let her fool you, he said, grinning, pitching his voice for the whole table, and more than the whole table, for the ranger beside him. Maggie's our cautionary tale, right, Mom? He looked at Lorraine, who did the thing she does, which is smile and not stop him. She's the reason I actually finished. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought, I am not going to be like Maggie. There was a laugh around the table. Not a cruel laugh, a comfortable one. The laugh of people repeating a familiar joke that has been sanded smooth by 20 years of handling. I set down my fork. Dylan, my mother said, but softly, without any force behind it. The way she had been saying my name in that house my whole life. He was not going to stop. He had the ranger's attention now, or he thought he did. And there's nothing on this earth like a 23-year-old with an audience he wants to impress. He leaned toward Sergeant Bell, and he lowered his voice into the register menus when they are about to say the meanest thing while pretending it is just a story. And he told him, "This is the cousin I told you about," Dylan said. "She couldn't even finish basic. They sent her home, quit in the first week, and now, I swear to God, she lives off my mom. 20 years. The family charity case." He clapped Sergeant Bell on the back like they were sharing a secret. "What?" he said when the young ranger did not laugh. "What'd I say?" I have thought a great deal since that night about the specific cruelty of the phrase "lives off my mom," and I have decided that the reason it landed the way it landed was that it was the exact and perfect opposite of the truth. For 4 years at that point, I had been paying my Aunt Lorraine's mortgage. Not all of it. Enough. Her husband had left years back, and the house had gotten away from her, and rather than watch her lose it, I had arranged quietly, through my mother, who was the only person I trusted to keep it quiet, to send money every month that closed the gap. Lorraine did not know it came from me. She thought it came from a refinance my mother had helped her get, some paperwork, some kindness of the bank. It did not come from the bank. It came from a sergeant major's paycheck, from the woman she had spent 20 years calling a charity case, and I had chosen to let her keep her house and her pride and her story all at the same time. Because I had decided, a long time ago, that being right was worth less to me than my father's sister sleeping under a roof. So when Dylan said "lives off my mom" and the table laughed, I was, at that exact moment, the reason his mother had a table to laugh at. I did not say that. I want you to know I never said that, not that night and not since, because the whole point of doing a thing quietly is that you do not get to spend it later. If you keep the receipt so you can wave it at somebody, then you were never really giving. You were only lending, at a very high rate of interest, payable in gratitude. I gave, so I kept my mouth shut, and I picked my fork back up, and I got ready to give them the small answer one more time. To say something like, "Well, somebody's got to be the family disappointment, and let the laugh close over the moment and let Dylan have his night." That is the truth of what I was going to do. I was going to let it stand. 26 years of practice does not evaporate because the joke got meaner. If anything, the meaner it got, the more the old machinery took over, the fold, the shrink, the small answer. Protect the room, protect the boy, disappear. I had my mouth open to do it. And across the table, Staff Sergeant Marcus Bell put down his glass. He did it very carefully. That is what I noticed first, before anything else. The carefulness of it, the way a man sets down a glass when his hands have started to do something he has not authorized. He set it down and he squared it on the tablecloth with 2 fingers, and he went still, and he looked at me, really looked, the way he had looked at me in the living room, but finished this time. All the way, the lock turning the last tumbler over. The color went out of his face. I have seen a lot of faces do a lot of things, and I knew what that was. That was not surprise. Surprise is a fast thing, a flash, and this was slow. This was the blood actually leaving a man's face as his brain finished a piece of arithmetic it had been working on since the front door. I watched him look at me, and then look at Dylan, and then look at me again, and I watched him understand that the woman his young friend had just called a quitter, who could not finish basic training, was the drill sergeant who had, 12 years earlier, personally dragged him through the worst 10 weeks of his life and refused to let him quit. "Man," he said to Dylan very quietly, "stop talking." Dylan, riding high, did not hear the tone. "What? It's just Maggie." And Marcus Bell stood up. He stood up so fast that his chair went over backward and he did not reach to catch it. It hit my aunt's hardwood floor with a crack that stopped every conversation at that table at once. And in the silence that followed, Staff Sergeant Marcus Bell, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 deployments, a scroll on his arm, and a stillness in him that a room like that could not have earned in 100 years, came to attention in my aunt's dining room. His heels came together, his hands came to the seams of his jeans, his chin came up, and his eyes went to a spot on the far wall, the way they teach you. And he was shaking. Not much, but I could see it. His hands were trembling against his legs, and his jaw was tight. And this grown man, this ranger, this soldier, who had been to places Dylan had only seen in videos, stood at rigid attention in front of a pot roast because his body had made a decision his mind was only now catching up to. "Drill Sergeant Thorne," he said. The whole table looked at him. Then the whole table looked at me. "Sit down, Sergeant Bell," I said, as gently as I have ever said anything. "You're going to break my aunt's chair, and then I really will have to pay for it." He did not sit down. "Everybody at this table needs to know who this is," he said, and his voice was not loud, but it had the thing in it that a good soldier's voice gets, the thing that makes a room hold still, and the room held still. "You are talking about Drill Sergeant Thorne. I went to basic combat training in the summer I turned 18, and I was going to quit in week 2. I had my mind made up. I had a plan to fail the next event on purpose so they would send me home. And this woman," he stopped. His jaw worked. "This woman saw it in me before I did anything, and she got in my face. And then, after, when nobody was watching, she got down next to me while I was doing push-ups in the sand, and she said 8 words to me that I have carried for 12 years. Dylan had stopped grinning. I watched it happen on his face, the slow fall, the math arriving. "She said," Marcus went on, and his voice cracked, just slightly, on the memory. "I did not pick you to quit on me. That's it. 6 of those, then 2 more, on your feet." He breathed. "I got on my feet. I finished basic. I went to airborne. I went to selection. I have been in the regiment for 9 years, and I have a family and a life. And there's a very good chance I'm alive at all, because when I was 18 years old, a drill sergeant named Thorne decided I was not allowed to quit." Nobody said anything. My Aunt Lorraine had gone the color of paper. "She's not a ranger, Dylan," Marcus said, quieter now, turning to the young man beside him. "She's better than a ranger. She's the reason there are rangers. She's a sergeant major. She runs the schoolhouse that makes drill sergeants for the entire United States Army. Do you understand what I am telling you? The woman you just called a quitter is the person the Army trusts to decide who is allowed to train soldiers at all." He finally looked at me, and the shaking had reached his eyes. "I'm sorry, drill sergeant," he said. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sit there." I stood up. I did it slowly because a room like that does not need one more sudden movement. And I walked around the end of the table, past my mother, past Dylan, who could not lift his eyes to me, and I stood in front of Staff Sergeant Marcus Bell. And I looked up at him, because he had 8 inches on me the way half my soldiers do, and I put my hand on his shoulder. "At ease, Sergeant Bell," I said. "Sit down before you fall down. That is an order, and it is the last one I am going to give at this table, because I am off duty, and so are you, and there's pot roast getting cold." He sat. He picked up his own chair first and set it right, and sat and put his hands flat on the table like a man steadying himself on a boat. And I stood there, in the middle of my aunt's dining room, in my nothing clothes and my going-home watch. With 26 years of a story I had let everyone believe lying broken all over the tablecloth. And I felt, God help me, not triumph. I want to tell you I felt triumph. I had imagined this moment in an idle way 1,000 times over the years, the moment the truth walked in and set the record straight, and in every version I had imagined I felt vindicated and tall and finally seen. I did not feel tall. I felt exposed, and I felt tired. And mostly I felt a terrible tenderness toward a 23-year-old boy at the far end of the table who had just been humiliated in front of his own send-off dinner by a truth he did not know he was standing on. "It's all right, Dylan," I said to the top of his bowed head. "You didn't know. Nobody let you know. That one's on me, and it's on some other people. And it is not on you." The room stayed quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when 15 people are recalculating 20 years all at once. The dinner did not recover, and I did not try to make it. What happened instead was the thing that always happens when a story that has been holding a family in place suddenly falls out from under it. Everybody had to find their feet again, and they found them at different speeds and in different directions, and I stood back and let them, because it was not my job, that night, to manage anyone's balance but my own. My mother found her feet fastest. She reached across the table and took my hand, the same hand she had held too long by the window, and she said, in a voice that carried further than she meant it to, "I have wanted to tell people for 20 years. And I understood then the thing I had seen in her face when I came in, the thing I had not had time to read. She had known. Of course she had known. She was the one I sent the mortgage money through. She had been keeping my secret for 4 years and my father's death for 26, and she had wanted, all that time, to stand up in this exact room and tell everyone who her daughter actually was, and she had not done it because I had asked her not to, and she had loved me enough to keep a silence that cost her. "I know, Mama," I said. "I know you did. Thank you for not." Dylan got up from the table and left the room. I let him go for a few minutes, and then I went and found him, because that is also the job, the part of the job nobody sees, the part where after you have stood a young soldier at the edge of his own failure, you go and you sit down next to him in the sand. He was out on the back porch, in his fresh OCPs, sitting on the steps with his elbows on his knees, and he did not turn around when the screen door creaked. "I feel sick," he said. "I know," I said, and I sat down next to him on the step. Sergeant Major and Specialist, Aunt's porch, cold coming down. "Why did you let us say it?" he said, and his voice was thick. "All those years, why would you let us? I have been telling that story since I was a kid. I told it at my own graduation. I told it to my drill sergeants, Maggie. I stood in front of my own drill sergeants and told them my cousin washed out of basic, and one of them, I bet you one of them knew. One of them probably knew exactly who you were, and just let me stand there and—" He stopped. He put his face in his hands. "Because the truth had your grandfather's funeral inside it," I said. He looked up. "You never met him," I said. "He died before you were born. He was my father, and he was your grandmother's brother. And the reason everyone believes I quit is that he died while I was in basic training and I did not get home in time. And your grandmother needed that to be somebody's fault, and I was 18 and I was the one who had left. So it got to be mine. And I could never tell the true version, Dylan, because the true version starts with a man dying in a bed while his daughter folds shirts 3 states away, and I could not open that door. It was easier to be a quitter than to be the girl who wasn't there. So I let it stand. For 26 years. And you inherited it, clean, like a debt you didn't run up, and you have been paying interest on it your whole life without knowing what it was for. And I am sorry for that. That part is genuinely mine to be sorry for." He was quiet for a long time. "I'm shipping out in 9 days, he said finally. "I know. I don't want to leave being the guy who did that." "Then don't be him," I said. "That's the whole trick, Dylan. You don't get to erase it. You did it, and I felt it, and that's real. But you are not the last thing you did. You are the next thing you do. So go do a next thing." I bumped his shoulder with mine, the way my father used to bump mine. "You've got 9 days and a whole deployment. That is a lot of room to be somebody better than the boy at that table. Use it." Inside, I could hear the family reorganizing itself, the scrape of chairs, the low voices, and under it all, I knew my Aunt Lorraine, sitting at the head of her table, in the house I had been quietly keeping over her head, learning what she had built. I did not go to her that night. I want to be honest about that. There is a version of this story where the wronged woman crosses the room and embraces her weeping aunt, and everyone is healed by the pie course. And that is not what happened, because that is not how 26 years comes apart. It comes apart slowly, in pieces, over a long time, and some of it does not come apart at all. What happened is that Glenn told her. He told her the part I would never have told her, the mortgage, because Glenn, my tired brother, who had spent his whole life not being the one who started anything, chose that night, finally, to start something. I did not ask him to. I found out later that while I was on the porch with Dylan, Glenn had sat down next to his aunt at the emptying table and said quietly, "Aunt Lorraine, the money, the refinance. There was no refinance. It's been Maggie. It's been Maggie the whole time. And my Aunt Lorraine, who had needed a villain the year her brother died, and had reached out and found an 18-year-old girl standing conveniently within reach, sat at her own table, and learned that the villain had been paying her mortgage. She did not come to me that night. She could not. I understood that. It is one thing to be wrong. It is another thing to be wrong and cared for anyway, by the person you were wrong about, and to have to hold both of those in your hands at the same time. Some people can do that in an evening. Most people need years. My aunt is not a bad woman. She's a person who did a bad thing out of grief and then could not find the door back out of it. And I have been that person, in my own way, about my own father, so I was not going to stand in judgment of her on her own porch. What I did see before I left the house was her face across the ruined table, and it is a face I will carry for a while. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the empty chairs and the cold food and the wreckage of a dinner she had cooked all day to make perfect. And she had the expression of a person watching a building they lived in come down slowly, one wall at a time, and understanding for the first time that they had been the one loosening the bricks. I have seen a lot of hard things land on a lot of faces. That one was harder to watch than most, because there was no cruelty in it, only a terrible late arithmetic, and because I loved her, which is the part nobody tells you about being wronged by your own family. You do not stop loving them. That would be easier. You just have to love them and be furious with them and grieve them all at once, standing in a doorway, holding your car keys. I found Marcus Bell again before I left. He was standing out by the cars with his wife, a young woman named Sydney, who had come with him and spent the whole dinner being lovely to a family of strangers, and when he saw me coming, he straightened up, and I waved him off before he could do anything formal. "Off duty, Sergeant Bell," I said. "I mean it. Nobody comes to attention in a driveway." "Yes, drill sergeant." He almost smiled. Then he said, "I really am sorry, not for saying it. I'd say it again. I'm sorry it went down like that in front of your family." "Don't be," I said. "You did the right thing. You did the harder, right thing, which is the only kind that counts." I looked at him, this man I had last seen as a scared 18-year-old in the sand, standing now with a wife and a scroll and a life. "You finished," I said. "That's all I ever wanted from any of you. You finished. Because of you." "No," I said, "because of you. I just wouldn't let you forget you could." He nodded, and his eyes did the thing again, and his wife put her hand on his back, and I said goodnight to them, and I walked across the street to my car in the dark. And here is the part I did not expect, the part that is the real reason I am telling you any of this. I opened the trunk. I had come 300 miles to not open that trunk. I had built an entire evening, an entire 26 years, around not opening it. And I stood there in the dark with the dome light of the trunk shining down on the spare tire, and I reached in. And it was not the uniform I took out. It was the photograph. I had put a copy of it in the trunk, too, the one of my father in the side yard with the wrench, in a frame, because I do that. I keep him in more than one place, the way you keep a thing you are afraid of losing. And I stood at the open trunk of my rental car on my aunt's street, in the cold, and I took my father out of the dark, and I looked at him squinting at me across 26 years, and I did the thing I had never once let myself do. I sat down on the back bumper, and I held my father, and I missed him. Out loud, in the dark. A 44-year-old sergeant major sitting on the tailgate of a rental car, crying over a framed photograph. And I want to tell you it was the worst I have felt in years, and also the first clean thing I had felt in longer than that. Because here is what the tower had cost me, the tall, disciplined tower I had built so I would never have to feel this. It had worked. That is the terrible thing about it. It had worked perfectly. For 26 years, I had not had to feel my father die, because I had been too busy finishing things, proving things, arguing with a woman in the back of a church, being excellent, being small at home and enormous at work, running so fast in both directions that the grief could never catch me. And the moment the story fell apart, the moment Marcus Bell stood up and told the truth, and I could not hide behind the quitter anymore, the grief caught me. Instantly. Like it had been running right behind me the whole time. That was the cost of the win. I need you to understand that it was a real cost, because it is easy to hear a story like this and think the reveal is the happy ending, the room finds out, the villain is shamed, the wronged woman is vindicated, roll the credits. But the reveal did not give me back my 26 years. It did not give me back my father. What it did was take away the story I had been using as a wall, and behind that wall was everything I had walled off. And I had to sit on a bumper in the cold and finally feel all of it. I would not trade it. That is the strange, true thing I came to over the following weeks. The wall had kept out the grief, but it had also kept out my mother, who had wanted to tell people for 20 years. It had kept out Glenn, who finally started something. It had kept out any version of my family knowing me. I had traded my whole self away to avoid one afternoon of feeling, and I had gone on paying that trade every single day for 26 years, and I had called it dignity. And it was not dignity. It was just fear with very good posture. I sat on that bumper until I was done, and then I wiped my face, and I put my father back in the trunk, gently, and I closed it, and I drove to a motel by the interstate, and slept 11 hours, which I have not done since I was a private. The last of it came in pieces over the following weeks, the way I told you it would. Dylan wrote to me before he even shipped out. A real letter on paper, which surprised me, from a 23-year-old. He said he had been thinking about the porch. He said he wanted to be the reason somebody finished, the way I had been, and he asked me how you do that, how you become that for another person, and I wrote him back the truest thing I know, which is that you do it by finishing things yourself, out loud, where the younger ones can see, so they learn that finishing is a thing a person can survive. He deployed. He writes me every few weeks. He is, from the sound of it, becoming somebody better than the boy at that table, which is all I asked of him on the porch, and it is turning out to be the beginning of the first real thing he and I have ever had. Marcus wrote to me, too, about a week after the dinner. He did not have to. We had said our piece in the driveway, and there was nothing owed in either direction, but there was a card in my box at the academy, and inside it was a photograph, an old one, a little bent, of a basic combat training graduation from the summer of 2014. He had circled a face in the back rank, an 18-year-old with his ears sticking out and his chin up and terror behind his eyes, barely held down by pride, and he had drawn an arrow to it and written, "This guy was going to quit on a Tuesday." And then he had drawn another arrow to a figure at the edge of the frame, a drill sergeant in a brown round, mid-stride, caught yelling something at somebody off camera. And he had written, "She did not let him." Thank you, drill sergeant, 12 years late. I keep that card in my desk drawer, and on the days when the schoolhouse feels like a lot of paper and not much soldier, I take it out and look at the ears on that kid, and the woman at the edge of the frame who had no idea that morning that the tired throat and the aching feet were buying anything at all. That is the strangest mercy of the work. You almost never get to see what it bought. And then once in a while, 12 years later, it stands up at a dinner and knocks over a chair. Lorraine took the longest, and she took it in the smallest steps, and I let her have everyone at her own pace. She called my mother, first, and cried. Then about a month later, she called me. She did not apologize in a grand way. She's not built for grand ways. What she said, after a long time of not quite saying anything, was, "I didn't know how to grieve him, so I picked you." 3 sentences, more or less. It was not everything. It was not nothing. It was, I have come to believe, exactly as much as she had, and a person who gives you exactly as much as they have has given you all of it, and I told her I knew, and I told her I forgave her, and I did, because I had needed the same forgiveness from myself for the same 26 years, and I was not going to be stingier with her than I was learning to be with me. Glenn drove me to the airport the morning after the dinner before all of that. We did not say much for most of the drive. Then, close to the airport, with the planes coming down low over the road, he said, "I should have said something, any of the times. All those years, I knew you weren't. I knew. And I know," I said. "I let it happen, because it was easier." "I let it happen too," I said, "for the exact same reason. We can both put it down now." He pulled up to the curb, and he did not say anything else. But he got out and came around and hugged me a beat too long, which is my brother's whole vocabulary of apology. And this time I understood that it was not weakness. It was just all he had, offered fully. And a person who gives you all they have has given you everything. I flew back to the academy that afternoon. There was a class waiting for me, 90-some candidates who wanted a brown round and did not yet know what it would cost them to deserve one. And I stood in front of them the next morning, in my ASU, with my sergeant major chevrons on my sleeve and the drill sergeant badge on my chest, and I told them, the way I always do, that most of them were going to reach a moment where they discovered they were not yet the thing they had assumed they already were. But I said something else that day, something I do not usually say, and it surprised me on the way out of my mouth. I told them that the reason I do this job, the real reason under all the other reasons, is that a long time ago I did not get to finish something that mattered more than any of the things I have finished since, and that I had spent a great many years trying to finish my way out of that grief. And it does not work. You cannot finish your way out of grief. You can only carry it the way you carry anything heavy, by getting stronger and by not carrying it alone. I told them that the soldiers they were about to make would come to them broken and frightened, carrying things the candidates could not see, and that the job was not to break them further. The job was to stand next to them in the sand and refuse to let them quit, and then to remember for the rest of your life that you were the reason they got up. A few of the candidates came up to me after that formation, which they do not usually do, and one of them, an older one, a staff sergeant who had already done 2 combat tours before she ever came to my schoolhouse, waited until the others had gone and then said, quietly, that she had lost her mother during her own first enlistment and had never told anyone in uniform, and had spent 9 years being the tough one, the steady one, the one who did not need anything, and that she had not known until that morning that a person could say the thing out loud and still be the standard. I told her that a person could. I told her, in fact, that saying it out loud is part of the standard, the part nobody writes down, and that the strongest thing I had ever seen a leader do was let their people watch them carry something heavy without pretending it was light. She nodded, and her eyes were wet, and she squared herself away and went off to be a drill sergeant, and I stood there in the empty bay for a minute and thought about how many of us there are, walking around being the tough one, carrying a payphone and a short cord and a funeral we did not make it to, and never once setting it down where another person could help us hold it. I keep my father on my desk now. The wrench, the squint, the side yard. He is not in the trunk anymore. He is out where I can see him next to the wall of coins, and every morning when I come in, he is the first thing I look at. And some mornings, I still miss him so much I have to sit down. And I let myself, because I have learned that this is not weakness either. It is just love, with nowhere left to go, and you do not fold that away. You keep it out where you can see it. So here is the one thing the whole of it left me with. And I am going to say it to you directly, because you may be somebody's story instead of somebody's person, the way I was. And I want you to hear it from someone who lived on both sides of that wall. If the people who knew you first have decided who you are, and the person they decided on is smaller than the truth, you do not have to argue with them. Arguing is exhausting and it rarely works, and it usually costs more than it buys. You can just go, quietly, and be the real thing, all the way, in the rooms that will have it, until one day the truth you have been living walks into the wrong dinner wearing somebody else's face, and stands up so fast it knocks a chair over and says your name out loud in front of everyone. And when that day comes and it costs you something, and it will, let it. Let the wall come down. Let the grief you have been outrunning finally catch you, because on the other side of that wall is not just the thing you were hiding from. It is everyone you were hiding from too, and they have been waiting a long time to meet the person you actually are. I am Sergeant Major Thorne. I did not quit. I have never quit anything in my life. I finish what I start every single time, and I train the people who train the people who defend this country. And I am the standard when there is an argument about what right looks like. And I miss my father every single day. Both of those are true. It turns out they were always going to be true at the same time, and the only thing the wall ever did was keep me from knowing it.